Welcome back to Open Line. If you are just joining us, we are coming up on the half hour. We're talking with Allen Sircy, the author of Southern Ghost Stories. Oh, we're learning so much about the history of our little town here and the surrounding towns around Nashville as well. You've written several books, 10 or 11, you say. Can't keep track because you're still working on more. Sounds like you work on about 5 at a time.
Yeah, I do.
But let's talk a little bit about Gallatin. You've written 2 books about Gallatin. Why?
Well, it's funny. I wrote the first one in 2019. I thought I was done. I went on Murfreesboro and did one down there, and it's weird. People kept calling me, hey, why don't you come here and do a speaking engagement? Can you do a tour for our group? And you start doing these books, and you keep hearing stories, and you get more stories. And Trousdale Place is a big part of the sequel. The house was built in 1813 by a congressman. Eventually, it was acquired by Governor William Trousdale, and the group that oversaw it, the DAR, the person who oversaw the house, she came to town once a year for like 15, 20 years. So the house was empty except for like 2 or 3 days once a year. So now we have a new group in charge of the house, and it's just
bustling
all the time. Yeah, so they've got something stirred up. So I started doing tours back in 2019, and I've been doing them more frequently. And I tell people on the tours, take a picture of the windows, take a picture, you might get something. And they get things on the tour. It's pretty wild.
You brought us some pictures, I think 2 different ones. So let's take a look. We have those. Tell me what we're seeing here.
To me, it looks like a girl in a window. It's weird. The lady that I was talking about 2 weeks ago, the lady who took it, she was trying to show me another window, and I zoomed in on that one, like, no, there's a girl in that window. And that one, that's really strange. It's straight up a girl in the window.
Yes. So is there a story surrounding a girl in this house?
There was a girl who died in that room. She was 18. Sadly, her dad died 9 days before her in the other bedroom. And then she died there 9 days later, and her mother, she gave the house to the DAR and said she was done, moved to Nashville. Wow. There's so much sadness there. But yeah, the girl died in the window, or died in the room, and now just...
Every now and then.
Yeah, the director sends me videos, surveillance videos, and you see orbs floating around the room, and yeah, during the tours, literally every other night someone gets a picture of something in those windows. It's weird. I
would just sit out there, I don't think that's how it works, but that's so interesting. Tell me more about Gallatin. What other stories do you like?
It's funny, on your phone there's an app, if you want to download it, it's called the Ghost Radar Legacy. And the science behind it is the spirits can communicate with you through words on your phone. Okay. I thought it was just a cash grab from a developer, something kind of hokey. But I downloaded it. Every now and then something weird happens. Well, I was in this store called Timeless Treasures on the square in Gallatin, and the owner and I were walking upstairs, and the word dropped appeared on my phone. And at that exact moment, a lady in front of me dropped something. Strange. So the owner, she downloads it the next day. She's upstairs working, and she gets 2 words on her phone, Devin and Carter. So an hour later, she goes downstairs, and FedEx pulls up. Devin's on the name tag.
No.
It's weird. So a little bit later, Amazon pulls up for their delivery for the day. And just jokingly, the cashier goes, let me guess, your name's Carter, right? Yes, ma'am, how'd you know? Show me your driver's license.
No.
His name was Carter.
No,
but the weird thing about it was,
crazy.
That's 112 Northwater. He was lost. He was trying to go to 112 Southwater. He had no business being in that building that day.
I mean, this stuff is nuts.
Yeah, it's weird.
Nuts.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's very strange.
There have to be people that say, you just make this stuff up to sell books.
No.
Right? No?
People send me this stuff. I mean, it's like I invite folks, take pictures.
Yeah.
And it's on the tours, people will take pictures, and occasionally they'll get something, and I'll debunk it. There's a place up on, I think on the square up here in Gallatin, and a lady took a picture, and I'm like, I can debunk it. I took a picture the other night to show people I want to debunk it. In this picture, you can see it's like a face or like a head and a body on a staircase. But when you zoom in, there's a chandelier with only 2 lights, so the lights are shining on the chandelier. So like, I want to show people that I'm legit. I want to debunk things. If everything is haunted, nothing is haunted. That's how I look at it.
Well, that's true. That's absolutely true. You said you're working on Hendersonville right now, right?
Yes, ma'am. I put West Nashville in the can. That'll be out in the spring, and now Hendersonville. I've kind of tinkered with that for a while. Hendersonville, there's a lot of history, but a lot of Native American stuff, a lot of stuff on the river there. A lot of old mansions, a lot of Native American stuff where, like Indian Lake, it's called Indian Lake for a reason. A lot of those businesses up there have stories. Yeah. It's old Indian land.
All right, I live out in Mount Juliet. You got anything from Mount Juliet?
What's this, Tate Lane? I've heard stories about it being haunted. They see things like lights at night. But I don't have a lot of stories from Mount Juliet.
Okay, well, you're invited to come out anytime. I'm sure people got them. I'll try to source some for you. That's very interesting. Let's get back to Nashville. Those are your 2 latest ones. You said you have West coming out. You said there's a lot of crazy things in West Nashville, too.
Well, yeah, I mentioned Tony Alamo. That was a big thing when I was a kid. Tony Alamo, he was a he was a preacher, but he's really like a cult leader.
Right.
He was from Missouri. He's a washed-up singer, so he went to California, and he tried to brainwash these people, saying that he would find struggling artists and say, "Hey, I manage the Doors," or Mick Jagger begged me to manage him, and he got these folks to give him the keys to their career, and he took all their money, and then he started preaching, quote unquote, and he preyed on the homeless and the downtrodden and got them to work for him, and he built this big following. He went to Arkansas, built a big compound. Well, eventually the feds come looking for him. They get to Arkansas, they come to his backyard where the big tomb for his wife Susan's located, and they get there and her body's gone. So during this time, he also owned a church on Music Row, and they say that he took his wife's remains and hid her in a freezer in that church.
Okay.
And now that church is now a recording studio, and they say they see a blonde-haired lady walking around the building at night. So yeah, weird stuff like that. Yeah.
Now, were you aware of any of this before you started working on this book?
Weird stories like the Methodist Church Cemetery in Antioch. When I was a kid, I heard stories about it. I had a friend that there's an old abandoned house back there, and he'd go hide in it. He saw a guy kind of float across the cemetery, and now there's an apartment complex right there. And I talked to the owner of the complex or the manager, and she's telling me, yeah, people don't want to live back there. They see shadows, and you build on top of a cemetery. What do you expect, you know?
Yeah. Do you find when maybe there's a story that's been around for a while that it gets built upon a lot, and then you kind of have to dig it back down to the roots?
Well, like the Bell Witch is something that I always get asked about. They think I'm an expert in all this, but the Bell Witch is just, it's a tale of a story that just, I don't know what to believe anymore. You hear the same thing. Oh, my sister took a rock from the cave and she wrecked her car the next day.
Right.
I won't even touch it because I'm not even sure what's true and what's real.
Yeah.
I think it's all just kind of embellished.
What are some of the things that people will say that you go, oh, there might be legs to this one? Like, what gives you the tip off, or how do you know?
I'm just researching the history. I'm trying to think, like Union Station in the South National book. I mean, there was a lady told me they had a ghost of a young boy they call him the porter. He's a young man they see in the hotel. Well, I started digging in on that, and I found a newspaper clipping. There's a guy he's a 12-year-old kid from St. Louis. He was at the station and run away, and the cops grabbed him and took some cyanide from his coat and drank it and died right there in the lobby of the train station. Oh. So you hear about Annabelle or was it room 711? They say it's the haunted room, but I mean, I've heard stories from housekeeping, but to me the really cool story is the young man who committed suicide, because that's what they see down there running around. Wow. Yeah.
That's crazy. Tell me about the Hermitage. Anything out there? I was just there on a 4th grade field trip.
Well, the story I was told, my cousin, he was the director for a historic house in Middle Tennessee, and he told me that the Hermitage had ghost stories, so they didn't really talk about it. But then 2020 happened, and all these historic sites needed funding, so they had to do something. Now they do tours, and they say, one of the stories I heard from a lady that used to work there, that Jackson was just heartbroken when his wife died.
Right.
I'm sure you know the story. That she was married to a gentleman in Kentucky, and he sent her away, and he filed a divorce in the courts. But the thing was, Kentucky was a district of Virginia, and they were trying to get Virginia to make that to a state. And somewhere in the shuffle, the paperwork never got filed, and they were still married. So Jackson was married to a married woman, and the bigamy charges, it followed him everywhere as he ascended up to the presidency. And they said when she died before he was inaugurated, so she never went to Washington. They buried her in an inaugural gown. So they said that Jackson would go out to the Hermitage, because he buried her right there in the backyard, in the big elaborate tomb, and he would just walk around and just smoke a cigar and talk to her. And I had a volunteer tell me that she'd go out there some mornings and she would just smell cigars all around the grave where Rachel is buried.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's weird.
That's so interesting. My little 4th grader was standing right there helping give a tour a couple of weeks ago. I would have loved to have known that. These stories, obviously, they sell books, they help tours. What is it, do you think, that people love about a good ghost story?
It's just the unknown, and just not knowing and wanting to know. Wanting to be scared, but not wanting to be scared. I don't know. It's just the fun of it, I believe. I
mean, these ghost stories aren't the guy in the boogie mask, with the knife. These are just like, people stories.
Yeah, and you watch one of the movies or the TV shows, and those ghost hunting TV shows, where the guys are scared to death and things fall over. That's not really how it works. Weird things happen, and Like on my tours, you get weird pictures, but nothing's going to jump out and grab your hair or push you down the stairs. That's from the movies.
When I lived in Louisville, I did a ghost tour, and there were always stories surrounding the TB hospital there.
Beverly Hills.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, it's creepy.
I got a story about that place.
Oh, go ahead.
Actually,
this is so good.
I just published a book about Louisville last year.
I
know. And I was up there for a tour a while back, and I just happened to look behind me, and while I was looking, the room went from light to dark. And I said something to the lady behind me, and she's like, well, they say there's ghost stories here. And after that, I reached out to a volunteer who I knew who was into the paranormal. She's like, oh, that's Big Black. They say there's a spirit in Louisville at the Beverly Hills. They call him Big Black. He'll like, it's some dark energy that can engulf rooms. There's been people who go there, and they'll just leave in the middle of the night, go home, and lose track of time for 2 days. I know of 2 people it's happened to.
Oh my goodness.
A buddy might happen to him. Like he went home and like 2 days later he called his friends like, hey, I was at Beverly Hills, and then I woke up and it's 2 days later I'm at home. I don't know what happened. So Beverly Hills, yeah, a lot of folks died there. It's
yes,
really sad.
Yes, it's very sad, and there's just so much lore around it. And at one point, I've been gone so long, and they were talking about developing it and changing it into something, but when I was there, it was just run down, empty, and creepy.
And my favorite story about Louisville is this seances. Spiritualism was huge in Louisville in the 1920s. Back then, these people toured the country, and it's like do parlor tricks. They tip tables. They would just do tricks to make people think the spirits they were communicating with them. But there was one guy, and he sold out this small little arena, and he's talking to these people, and at the end of the show, he said something like, I am so-and-so, and my wife will be joining me soon. And that guy's daughter was in the audience. She started screaming. 2 days later, her mother died. So it's like, you know, all that stuff's kind of sketchy, but I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's so crazy. Do you get invited to different towns to say, hey, come and just check us out? Or do you just go say, I
just kind of go. I mean, I get asked to speak every now and then at a few places. Mostly just me kind of, like I did a Philadelphia book. Because I've been going up there every summer for the past 3 or 4 years. And there's so much history. Back then, in the 1700s, they were fighting the crown for independence. Down here, there were some natives hunting buffalo. And this land here was a reward for fighting against the British. So up there, the history in Philadelphia, the East Coast, it's amazing the stuff that happened up there.
What else are you working on?
Oh, I finished West Nashville, Hendersonville, Brentwood. I wanted to do Lookout Mountain. There's a story there because it was the battle above the clouds where the rebels were entrenched, and Grant told his men, don't attack them. They're dug in. Well, his men took it as a challenge and ran them out. Well, 40 years later, they're making Ruby Falls, and all these guys died with dynamite making that big cave.
Oh, yeah.
So there's stories about, they hear whispers, they smell random things down there. So there's a story right there. I just got to find time to go dig into it.
Oh, so very neat. Have you ever done the Gatlinburg area, anything like that?
No, my wife wants to go down there, and I'm not opposed to it. Just I got to find time. I got a 3-year-old, so it's...
And you have another full-time job. This is not what you do for a living. What piqued your interest? Was it living in the haunted house?
Yeah, that, and also going to Savannah, just all the history, and there's quietly so much history here under our nose. I mean, the Civil War, Tennessee was ground zero. There's so many battles here. Murfreesboro is the only city in the country that had 3 Civil War battles in the entire country. Do
you ever look into current day ghost stories? I mean, you say you love the history part of it.
I do, but you got to be respectful. I've got 2 stories I'm sitting on for Gallatin that I can't tell because there are families still around who are impacted by that. And I don't want to pick that scab for somebody who's lost a loved one.
Yeah, makes sense.
So yes, it happens a lot.
So these stories are still happening. I guess new ones maybe are still happening. It's not just the ghosts from yesteryear. Yeah, the one story, the reason I wrote the first Gallatin book, there was a story that happened in Gallatin, just off the square, and a young person lost her life, and now that person's mother is 99 years old. So I can't do that just yet. So. Interesting. But a lot of these stories come from tips or... Oh, yeah. People, I mean, we start writing books, people want to tell you their stories. Hey, are you guy writes the ghost books? Yes, ma'am. Oh, well, this happened to me and my aunt, or my sister's sister saw this, or my dad told me this. The Mount Olivet and the South Nashville story. There's a story in there, or a tip I had 3 years ago where a lady told me something while I was researching the Gallatin book. Yeah. Her dad was the caretaker of Mount Olivet, and he had a small little shack he lived in that was super haunted. So I get tips all the time. I just make a little note and file it away till I come back to it. I'd love to see your desk at home. Okay, we have to take another quick break. If you have any questions about any area landmarks, give us a call. Time's running short. 615-737+. Stay with us.